Well, good morning, everyone. It's 10 o'clock, time for me to open this hearing concerning the Old Oak and Park Royal Development Corporation local plan modifications. Thank you all for attending. Before I proceed, I need to do three things. Firstly, I need to check that you can all see and hear me. So what I'd like you to do to indicate that you can see and hear me is to use the hand raise tool. And then if I see that everyone's got their hands up, I know you can all see me. I've got most hands up. Robin Brown, I can't see your hand. Yes, now I can. And Chloe Horner, and someone who is on my screen as AV Services guest. I don't know who that is, but whoever it is, not got their hand up. So yeah, now they have. Right, so everyone's got their hand up, and so I know now that you can all see and hear me. So you can all put your hands down, please. Thank you. And then the second thing I need to do is to remind you that, excuse me, in compliance with the data protection regulations, I need to remind you that this session is being recorded and is being streamed live, and so may be recorded by other people. If you're not happy with your image or your voice being recorded in that way, then you can continue to watch the proceedings, but you will need to keep your camera off if you don't want your image being recorded, and you'll need to keep your microphone off if you don't want your voice being recorded. And then thirdly, I just need to remind people about the protocols in running this hearing. We don't use the chat function. Indeed, I think it may have been disabled. If you need to attract my attention, you use the hand raise tool and wait to be asked to speak. And because the system picks up every sound from every microphone, unless you're actually speaking, can you keep your microphones switched off? Okay. So as some of you may already know, my name's Paul Clark. I'm a chartered town planner. I've been appointed by the Secretary of State to hold an examination into the soundness of this local plan, and I'm assisted by the Programme Officer for the examination, Charlotte Glancy, who is acting as an independent officer under my direction, not as an employee of the corporation. Now, Charlotte is the only person with whom I can have a private conversation during these hearing sessions. Everyone else can only speak to me in public session. And I guess you've all met Charlotte in being admitted to the hearing session, but just in case, Charlotte, can you say hello, please? Right, there you go. Now feel free to drop in and drop out of the hearing sessions, but remember that if you press the leave button, you will actually be taken out of the software, and you will have to be readmitted through the lobby. So if you do need to take a break and go away from your seat, it's much easier just to switch off your camera and your microphone and then switch it back on again when you rejoin us. Now, a few words about the examination. It's very easy to think that these hearing sessions are the examination. That's not the case. These hearing sessions are just part of the examination. Inspectors vary in the way they conduct examinations. I do most of my examination by an exchange of correspondence. So if there's a matter on which I haven't called a hearing session, it doesn't mean that I think a point that has been raised is not significant. It simply means that I feel happy to deal with it in writing. The examinations are largely so that those who have a right to be heard can exercise that right. The hearings are largely for that purpose. Much of the examination takes place by exchanges of correspondence, which started 4th of October 2018, when the corporation formally submitted the local plan documents to the Secretary of State, and there's been a previous series of hearings which took place between April and July 2019. And unless the plan is withdrawn, the examination continues by further exchanges of correspondence until I issue my binding report to the corporation. So in carrying out the examination, I'm looking for a number of things. One is whether the plan complies with legal and procedural requirements. And another is whether it is sound. Soundness is tested in 4 ways. Has the plan been positively prepared to meet objectively assessed requirements? In other words, is there anything missing that should be in the plan? Is the plan justified? Would it be effective? And is it compliant with national policy? And the sessions today and tomorrow are concerned with all those aspects. When the plan was originally submitted to the Secretary of State, there had been approximately 90 responses, making about 1,600 comments on 800 or so issues. I say approximately because the Opdc had published its intended submission plan twice, making revisions to the second version as a result of submissions made on the first. And some participants responded to the second publication by reaffirming their representations made on the first publication, and many participants have made identical representations. Many, of course, have made multiple points. My own initial appraisal of the 2 documents led to 30 or so additional questions to the corporation. And in submitting the local plan, the corporation also submitted a schedule of proposed minor modifications. Now, as the examination has proceeded, the corporation has seen the necessity of preparing and submitting modifications to the plan. And they were published for public comment in March 2021. And the corporation has considered the 142 public responses made and issued its consideration of them in September 2021, including some further minor modifications. And I've considered both the public comments made and the corporation's responses to them. And I have published my conclusions in 3 documents, which are published on the website. That's with the reference number ID 37, 38 and 43. And one of my conclusions is that on certain matters, I would benefit from having further hearing sessions. And there'll be 4 of those today and tomorrow. Firstly, today, this one now covering public transport accessibility levels. And then this afternoon, we'll have a session on conformity with the London Plan Policy D9 on high buildings. And then tomorrow, we'll have a morning session on policies E1 and E2, and then an afternoon session on the Twyford Abbey allocation. For each session, I will start by summarising what I understand to be the essence of the representations made and the corporation's response to them. And then I'd like a short discussion on each of the matters in turn. We'll work through the matters for discussion which I've identified in the agendas, which have been published on the website, and I will invite comment from participants and then the corporation. Obviously, I want everyone to make sure that they have had an opportunity to say what they want to say, but I can only hear one person at a time, so try not to speak across each other. Show me that you want to speak, and I will ask you to do so. And I'll have a number of questions of my own to put. When I think we've had enough conversation on each topic, I will say so, and if everybody agrees, we'll move on to the next topic and not go back. I have read all the representations and all of the submitted papers, but you may want, so you don't need to repeat what you've said, but you may want to refer me to particular passages in support of what you're saying. What I'm looking for in this hearing session is proof for the assertions made in the submitted representations. I'll try and remember to take a mid-morning break. If people need a break and it looks as though I've forgotten to take a break, don't hesitate to say so. And I hope to break for lunch at about 1 o'clock or earlier, and then start the next session at 2 o'clock. Okay. Before I go on, are there any questions about the procedure from anyone? If you have any questions, use the hand raise tool. No, okay. So this morning's session is about PTALs, public transport accessibility levels. And the reason I wanted to have a discussion about this is that the plan is predicated on capitalizing on the transformative effects of public transport infrastructure, principally the High Speed 2 and Elizabeth Line station at Old Oak, but also including investment in enhanced bus services, particularly in early years. And the corporation's responses to the representations on the modifications make frequent references to the improvement in PTAL scores shown in figures 710 and 711, and they use and in their responses they use that as a justification for the high density mixed use development proposed. But the modifications actually remove some proposed transport infrastructure schemes from the submitted plan. So when I look at the Industrial Land Review Addendum, that explains in paragraph 4.6 that candidates for release from strategic industrial land designation and allocation as housing focus on areas that have the greatest access to sustainable transport modes. And table 3 of that document includes proximity to improved PTALs as a selection criterion. So that's why I wanted to test out whether that has actually worked. Now, a number of representations to the modifications argue that the proposed additional site allocations would not be well served by public transport. So in this session, I want to explore the degree to which changes in PTALs justify the modifications to the plan. So in my agenda, I've set out some matters for discussion, and I'd like to work through those one by one. So my first question concerns the bus strategy update, and that document records that between now and 2027, new developments focused around Scrubs Lane, Old Oak Lane, Old Common Lane, North Acton and Park Royal will add up to 1,860 trips in the peak hours, the equivalent of 18 double-decker buses. And the strategy records that up to 2038, further development will add an additional 3,000 peak hour trips, equivalent to 40 double-decker buses. And that by 2048, it will add, the remaining development will add a further 2,100 peak hour trips, equivalent to 28 double-decker buses. Now, what wasn't clear to me when I read the bus strategy update was whether those calculations of trip and bus generation were based on London-wide averages taken from Trix or some other data set like that, or whether they allow for the corporation's car-free and car-reduced policies, which of course would tend to produce higher than average public transport trip rates. So is there anyone from the corporation that can enlighten me on that point? Who wants to go first? Mr. Mools, I see you are representing the corporation. Are you going to be the sort of band leader for the corporation's staff?
That's right. If I could sort of field the questions to the appropriate person, perhaps if I could introduce the 5 people who are going to be fielding the questions in relation to hearing 1, and then I can call on them in turn, and you know who they are and what their role is. I think most of the names will be familiar, but dealing with PTALs, we're going to have Fred Raphael, if I could ask him to pop his camera on and just briefly say what his role is.
Morning, I'm the principal. I'm the principal transport planner for Opdc.
Thank you. So in addition to Fred, we're also going to have Tom Cardis. He'll be well known to these hearings.
Hi, morning all. Yeah, I'm Tom Cardis. I'm the head of planning policy for Opdc.
Thank you. And also Emma Williamson.
Hi, I'm Emma Williamson, the director of planning at Opdc.
Thank you. And then Peter Farnham.
Hi there, Pete Farnham, Principal Planner in the Policy team at Opdc.
And finally, Kevin Twomey.
Hi, Kevin Twomey, Senior Planning Officer with the Policy team at Opdc.
Thank you. And so kicking off on this first question, so it's going to be Fred Raphael with maybe some input from Tom and Emma following that.
Thank you, sir. Our response will cover 3 points: car parking approach, the bus strip generation approach, and clarification on the existing capacity and extra buses. On the car parking approach, Opdc's car parking policies are justified by a range of studies and are not so limited to evidence within Opdc's bus strategy. I should point out that the Opdc's bus strategy update was produced by TfL. The local plan is supported by the Old Oak Strategic Transport Study 2018, which demonstrates that a high public transport mode share is achievable. The assumptions made in the study is that trips by railway represent a significant proportion of public transport demand generated by the development, taking account of the opportunities presented by new rail stations at Old Oak Common and Old Oak Common Lane, proposals for West London Orbital, and capacity and accessibility upgrades to North Acton and Willesden Junction stations. Thus, new and enhanced rail stations will improve internal and external rail connectivity, access to stations and destinations served, providing greater capacity to support growth, while supporting reduced car dependency in line with Opdc's maximum parking standards. The Old Oak Strategic Transport Study 2018 identifies a considerable potential for walking and cycling and concludes that along with public transport, active modes will play an important role in reducing vehicle trips originating from the development. Supporting evidence, which includes Opdc's. Sorry, I had I thought someone else wanted to speak. Supporting evidence, which includes Opdc's public realm walking and cycling strategy 2018, Channel Gate Development Framework Principles 2021, and Park Rail Transport Study 2018 considers the potential for a significant mode shift to walking and cycling. These studies identify specific walking and cycling connections that will deliver a more legible and permeable and an altogether attractive network of streets and enhanced public realm, designed in accordance with TfL's Healthy Streets approach in the opportunity area integrated with green infrastructure. Furthermore, Opdc's strategic transport study, identifies measures to promote walking and cycling, such as new connections over Grand Union Canal and existing railway lines, publicly accessible high-quality cycle parking, new formal and informal pedestrian crossing facilities, and the introduction of legible London wayfinding signage to guide people who wish to travel on foot. Opdc's Infrastructure Delivery Plan 2018 and 2021 includes infrastructure for walking, cycling, and public realm, and shows how this will help deliver Opdc's mode shift ambitions. This demonstrates considerable effort is being made to achieve a significant mode shift from cars to walking and cycling. Opdc's approach to car parking has been informed by the Opdc Car Parking Study 2018, which identifies the need for restrictive parking policies. This aligns with London Plan policies, which strongly support prioritizing sustainable travel over car use and restricting parking levels in new developments to achieve the aim of a mode shift to 80% of trips across London being made by public transport and active modes by 2041, as advocated in the Mayor's Transport Strategy. Restricting developments to car-free in areas of PTOL 4 to 6B and a maximum of 0.2 per residential units elsewhere aligns with the London Plan and also forms part of the criteria for determining the suitability of development. Opdc has considered a number of developments against the London Plan and draft local plan and secured car-free developments where these are in line with the London Plan and Opdc draft local plan policies. It's worth noting that at each stage of the local plan and associated consultations, there has been a minimal number of objections from stakeholders to Opdc's car parking policies. Transport for London strongly supports the overall approach to car parking. The second point is the bus trip generation approach. The bus strategy update applies general trip rates to the number of households and jobs for each of the phases identified up to 2027 and up to 2038. Standard TfL London-wide assumptions have been used for this and assume one two-way bus trip per household per day, with 10% of these trips being made during the AM peak period, which is 8 AM to 9 AM. The assumption used for jobs is 30% of bus trips to and from work being made in the peak periods. Therefore, this generates the equivalent of 18 buses per hour of demand up to 2027 and 40 buses per hour up to 2038. And I should emphasize that the trip generation analysis has been undertaken by TfL. The estimated bus trips do not result in the supply of the stated number of empty double-decker buses to meet demand in each phase. This is because A, the existing bus network will have some spare capacity in the local area, and as such will have the ability to absorb some of the demand generated. And B, the demand generated is not in a single direction or a single bus route. Taking account of these factors, some assumptions about the distribution of demand have been made, which are that 25% of demand is generated in the counter-peak direction, and there's 25% of spare capacity on the existing bus network. These are standard and common assumptions made by TfL for modelling purposes, in line with what Transport for London has used for other developments in London. Therefore, it is reasonable to conclude that some of the demand generated will be matched to spare capacity on the existing bus network. It's also worth noting that since the modelling was undertaken, the numbers of people home working has increased and levels of bus patronage have dropped. Therefore, the modelling work has been undertaken. The modelling work that has been undertaken is likely to be showing a worst case in terms of bus usage levels. The third point is clarification on the existing capacity and extra buses. The bus strategy update 2021 places as much emphasis on improving bus connections across the opportunity area, delivering better connections and interchange with existing and new rail stations, including stations at Old Oak Common and Old Oak Common Lane, as it does on increasing frequencies to provide greater capacity to accommodate additional bus demand. However, it recognizes that capacity enhancements through increased frequencies in the peak period will play an important role and assumes that some bus routes would require greater capacity and some less. To illustrate this point, I make reference to I refer to the bus strategy update, which is at page 11 and 13. You can find this in the examination library, Opdc 39, Appendix E. In the text, it actually sort of presents the increase in capacities, and for 2027, the expected increase for route 228 is an extra 2 buses per hour. For the 440, that's an extra 2 buses per hour, and for the 487, that's an extra 5 buses per hour. In 2038, for bus route 7, it's an extra 7.5 buses per hour. For bus route 218, that's an extra 5 buses per hour. For the 220, that's an extra 8 buses per hour. And for the 226A, an extra 5 buses per hour. And a new route which will have 5 buses per hour. In addition to the provision of extra buses during the peak, the bus network upgrades include converting some single-decker buses to higher capacity double-decker buses. This will enhance capacity on parts of the network without the need for additional vehicles in the peak, and will ultimately result in a further reduction in the total number of additional buses that will need to be provided. It is worth noting that the frequencies on the affected routes will be increased if required through TfL's normal business as usual process, and that the work so far has focused on making sure that the structure of the bus network provides suitable connections to the new rail stations at Old Oak Common and Old Oak Common Lane, and better connections to the wider area. When securing bus contributions from developers, OPDC regularly asks that these contributions are paid upfront or on implementation to ensure that bus service enhancements can be delivered ahead of need. In conclusion, the bus trip generation calculation takes account of OPDC's car-free and car-reduced policies because it applies standard London-wide bus trip assumptions, and the applied assumptions account for the fact that most major developments in London now assume car-free or very low car use. However, it is worth noting that other modes will play an equally important role in accommodating development trips and desired mode shift from cars to sustainable travel. OPDC's Strategic Transport Study 2018 identified considerable potential for a mode shift to public transport and active modes. The local plan policies support this potential of mode shift to rail, walking, and cycling. Therefore, all sustainable transport modes will play an important role in supporting OPDC's car-free and car-reduced policies. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. So I think I heard you say that the study that TfL carried out used London-wide presumptions, but that those London-wide presumptions nowadays presumed car-free development. So, right, you're nodding, so I heard you correctly. Yes. Okay. So from that, I can deduce that in practice, there's no expectation that the development in the OPDC area will turn out to be greater than modelled by TfL. That was what I was worried about, was that, well, I wasn't worried about it. What I was thinking was that if the ratios, the trip generation ratios used by TfL were London-wide averages based on existing patterns of public transport use, that you might actually get an extra demand in the OPDC area through the use of car-free housing, and that extra demand would then be reflected by TfL in yet further increases in frequency, which might then produce PTAL levels even higher than those that have been modelled in the work that has been done in the background to this to these modifications. That's what I wanted. That's what I was I wanted to explore in my mind. But from what you say, what message that I'm drawing from that is that no, I'm mistaken, that the analysis that TfL has done is based on a higher level of public transport use because it presumes car-free housing that's built into the model. So from what you say, I can take it as being that the bus strategy that has been produced in support of these modifications is going to be robust. It's not going to be the case that there's going to be even more demand, which will be met by even greater frequencies of services. This can be relied upon to be a robust prediction. That's what I'm drawing from what you just said. Is there anything you want to add to that?
No, I would say yes. That's what you've your conclusion is accurate, and I would say that actually what we'd expect to see is this is a worst case scenario, as we've said, and what we'd expect to see is when developments actually come online, each development would be required to produce a transport assessment. And these transport assessments would actually do a sort of more detailed analysis of the trip generation for each development site. So the assumptions here are actually higher than we expect them to be. So that means that sort of we expect to see a sort of lesser trips than what the assumptions are currently.
Okay, thank you for that. Now, before I move on to my next point, which is item 7 on my agenda, is there anybody that wants to contribute to the discussion on item 6 on my agenda? If you do, put up your hand. Yes, Robin, you've got your hand up, Robin Brown. So let's hear from Robin Brown.
Thank you, sir. Just jumped in before Henry, I see. I'm Robin Brown. I'm a Chartered Town Planner, a retired local government officer, presently supporting the Grand Union Alliance, a community network. Now, just a brief point. Welcome to Fred Raphael. But I want to pick you up on the Park Royal and how much store you place on improving the public realm and the walking and cycling facilities. Unfortunately, the OPDC's bid to Transport for London for a livable neighbourhood has been suspended, along with many other similar bids from local authorities. And the livable neighbourhood project was to substantially upgrade the public realm and street network for cycling and walking within Park Royal. Although very little about the project had actually been published publicly. That £10 million project, we don't know whenever the possibilities will be that it will be resuscitated. So I just wanted to question the realism and deliverability of walking and cycling strategy, particularly in Park Royal. Thank you.
Thank you, Robin. Okay, who from the, well, before I have any, before I ask Tom guys to respond, I can see you've got your hand up, Tom, but can I hear from Henry Peterson first, and then you, Tom, you can pick up on points that both Robin Brown and Henry Peterson make. Henry Peterson.
Thank you. I'm Henry Peterson. I've been acting as advisor to the Old Oak Neighbourhood Forum for the past 5 or 6 years as a neighbourhood planning champion. I chair a neighbourhood forum in North Kensington. I worked for Hammersmith and Fulham for 35 years. So I'm very familiar with the area, both in a professional capacity and as a resident just outside the OPDC boundary to the east. In terms of car-free, I don't think any of us have raised issues for this session about that. We all understand car-free policies. They've been operating in Hammersmith and Fulham and Kensington and Chelsea for many years in relation to new development. I think there are issues about car-free policies that kick in at detail 4 in that, as we'll come on to later, we don't accept at the moment that a number of important locations for new housing will achieve detail 4, but we'll come back to that. Very briefly, I'd just like to take us back to the original transport study for the OBDC area, which was used for the Regulation 18 consultation, dated February 2016, which commented that the network of local access roads to the OOCOA, as it was then termed, is limited and predominantly runs north-south. The road network within the OOCOA is sparse of a core standard and only connects via single points to Scrubs Lane and Old Oak Common Lane. So I'd just like to reiterate the point we've made at every stage since the 19.2 plan, that the wider issues of connectivity across the Old Oak area are fundamental to its potential success as a sustainable new part of London, and that those existing road networks have not changed since 2015 in the last 7 years, and we see limited prospects of them changing in the planned period, frankly. A lot of assumptions are made, which we'll come back to later, about improved connectivity and improved PTEL levels, and I hope we can get into the detail on PTEL levels in particular.
Okay, thank you, Henry. Of course, it was a significant part of Mr. Raphael's comments that the Opdc is focused on shifting to away from cars and to walking and cycling, and so without anticipating what they're going to say, what I have drawn from my examination of the plan is that they are seeking to minimize the adverse effects of the restricted road access that you correctly refer to by focusing on walking and cycling. And no doubt, and certainly I have picked up from my examination of the plan that there are a number of improvements to walking and cycling infrastructure which do remain in the plan, and so that I can see that forms a part of a consistent strategy. But enough from me. Let's hear from Tom next. Tom Cardis.
Thank you. So just picking up firstly the point made by Robin in respect of the Liberal Neighbourhood Fund bid. Yes, we did have a Liberal Neighbourhood Fund bid that we submitted back in 2018 for transport enhancements in Park Royal. The Liberal Neighbourhood Fund is a fund run by Transport for London, and when in 2020 the COVID crisis occurred, that funding was paused. However, there was a new street space fund established at that point, and Opdc, in partnership with Ealing, was successful in securing some funding to deliver some walking and cycling enhancements to what we call the Big X, the four main roads, or two of the four main roads in Park Royal, through that street space funding. Notwithstanding that, we still have all of the elements within the fund bid are within our infrastructure delivery plan. So the walking and cycling enhancements along the Big X, improved bus connections, they were sort of what comprised the neighbourhood fund bid. They are all still contained within our infrastructure delivery plan, and we identified in our infrastructure delivery plan the role that there are various funding sources will play in securing the infrastructure that we need to support the regeneration of that area. So through a combination of planning contributions and or other funding sources, we remain confident that the measures contained within the IDP can be secured and delivered over the planned period. In respect of Henry's point, you're quite right in respect that yes, there are limited numbers of vehicular connections across the Opdc area, but our strategy is very much focused on ensuring that there's a modal shift. There's a London-wide target in the Mayor's transport strategy for 80% of journeys to be made by sustainable travel modes in future, in 2041, and we're very keen in our local plan to support that and where possible exceed that. So our policies in the local plan are aimed at ensuring that as much as being done as possible to ensure that people are getting to where they want to get to by either walking, cycling or public transport. And therefore, yes, the road network is limited, but we are confident that through the various infrastructure improvements we're proposing in the local plan, we will deliver an adequate network that will enable people to get to their point of destination at a suitable time.
Okay, thank you, Tom. Now, before I move on to my next subject 7, does anybody want to come back on what Tom has just said? If you do, put your hand up. No? Okay, in which case I'd like to move on then to item 7 on my list of matters for discussion. We've heard from Mr. Raphael confirmation that the bus strategy accompanying the modifications is thought to be robust, that the workings out of the corporation's car-free and car-reduced policies are not likely to lead to excess public transport demand over what has been modelled. So I'm assured that I can rely on what the bus strategy update says about additional bus provision, accepting the point that he made that this is a calculation at today's date, and that TfL will undoubtedly adjust matters as they evolve in response to demand as it materializes. I accept that point, but generally speaking, I am sure by what he says that I can take the bus strategy update as a robust document for my examination. So then, and that bus strategy records how many additional buses per hour would be provided on each route, and indeed a new route as well, which then triggered in my mind a recollection that from the beginning of this examination, there have been representations about the adequacy of the road network in the Opdc area, not just the adequacy in terms that Mr. Peterson has just described, the absence of a fine east-west network, but people have constantly made comments about the limited capacity on the north-south route, Scrubs Lane, Victoria Road, Old Oak Common Lane, and so on. And so I wanted some information about what examination has been made of the ability of the existing network to accommodate the additional bus services that are likely to be put in place. So, Mr. Moores, your band leader of this, who would you like to get to respond to that?
Thank you. As ringmaster, I'll ask Mr. Raphael to pick that one up again, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Our response again will touch on three very short points. One is the development scenarios and highway impact. The Old Oak Strategic Transport Study 2018 includes a robust assessment of the development's impact on the performance of the highway network. Output from TfL's strategic highway model, WELAM, which is a West London highway assignment model, were used to assess several development scenarios. The assessment shows that without proposed interventions, the predicted increase in development trips and natural background traffic growth results in severe delays on the local and strategic road networks. However, the assessment shows that a development scenario with reduced highway and high public transport mode share, together with other transport interventions outlined at Section 8 of the Old Oak Strategic Transport Study 2018, would not adversely affect the performance of the highway network. Additionally, the strategic modelling undertaken by TfL to support the London Plan and the Mayor's Transport Strategy has assessed the projected growth in the opportunity area within the overall growth projections for London and concluded that the projected growth is achievable with a sustainable transport mode share of 80%. The second point is in mode share assumptions and increased bus frequencies. The reduced highway and high public transport mode share scenario assessed by the Old Oak Strategic Transport Study 2018 assumes an increase in bus frequencies in line with the frequencies proposed in the Opdc Bus Strategy Update 2021. However, as explained in response to issue 6, existing capacity on the bus network will absorb some of the generated demand, and in reality, the stated number of double-decker buses in the bus strategy update does not mean that this many additional buses will be added to the network. It's important to note that growth in traffic demand, including additional buses during the peak, will be mitigated through a variety of highway interventions. These interventions have been assessed by the Old Oak Strategic Transport Study, which concluded that they will be effective in minimizing the traffic impacts of the development. This has informed the highway projects contained in Opdc's infrastructure delivery plan, which includes improvements along the bus corridors, including Strauss Lane, Old Oak Lane, Old Oak Common Lane, and Victoria Road. These improvements encompass carriageway widening to increase capacity, junction improvements, including introduction of new traffic signals and optimization of existing traffic signals at existing junctions, and will contribute positively to the overall performance of the highway network. And the last point is on demand management. The highway and public transport interventions identified in Opdc's strategic transport study and adopted in the infrastructure delivery plan are complemented by demand management measures, which includes restrictive car parking policies and standards to support and enable Opdc's mode shift ambitions from car journeys to public transport, walking, and cycling. In conclusion, Opdc is confident that with the implementation of highway interventions, the highway network will have capacity to accommodate the expected increased bus movement over the planned period. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Raphael. Now, once again, before I move on to my next topic, is there anything that anyone wants to say? Yes, Henry and Robin, you were there simultaneously. So I'll reverse the order this time, and Mr. Peterson, you can go first.
Thank you, Inspector. On reliance on a bus strategy, a great deal of the PTAL improvement measures that Opdc are assuming are relying on bus frequencies, bus routes, and so forth. The updated bus strategy is heavily qualified on its first page, which states that these are simply ideas. There is no commitment from TfL to deliver on these frequencies, route changes, and so forth. Our experience on development at Kensal Canal side, the immediately adjacent opportunity area, is that the developers there, who are Ballymore Sainsbury's and St William, part of the Berkeley Group, both major developers, are not getting agreement from TfL to all the changes of bus routes and frequencies that they would like to see to deliver acceptable levels of public transport access to their own developments, which are now at a very advanced stage, planning applications due within days, weeks. They have said in public that they have succeeded in getting commitments from TfL for some of those, but not for others. It's a similar site, landlocked, one entrance exit from Ladbroke Grove. It requires a loop arrangement for buses to trundle around the site, picking up and dropping off people. And not unreasonably, I think TfL are saying, sorry, we have to stick to our timetables and main routes north-south at Ladbroke Grove. We think exactly the same situation will arise in the Opdc area, and we urge you not to have complete confidence in the bus strategy, because there are no guarantees that we can see that TfL will be able to deliver on those new frequencies and so forth. Reliance on a bus strategy generally, we also have major concerns about. A PTAL strategy based on stations, whether overground, mainline, or underground, when you build a station, you at least know it is likely to be used. Although even that we cannot be certain of at the moment, because the Mayor of London is having to look very seriously at closure of the Bakerloo line or closure of stations at Warwick Avenue on Maida Vale, relatively underused, because of the huge budget cuts that TfL face, unless the government makes what TfL call an extraordinary additional budget concession in terms of TfL revenues. So we think everything is completely up in the air in terms of forecast predictions as to what TfL will be able to deliver in terms of bus routes. When Section 106 is used to supplement bus routes, that is an ongoing revenue commitment. It is not the same as funding for a permanent piece of transport infrastructure, where it is realistic to look at SIL and Section 106 to fund major capital investment. We don't think reliance can be placed on a continuing revenue stream if bus routes and frequencies require subsidies in the longer term to achieve the PTAL levels that Opdc are assuming. So we think it is a pyramid of assumptions that is being put forward in these modifications, any one of parts of which can come unstuck very easily. Thank you.
Yeah. Mr. Peterson, could you just clarify one thing, what you've said there? You say the developers at Kensal Canal side, which you're familiar with, aren't getting from TfL the services that the developers think are necessary.
That's correct.
What I wasn't, I'm not sure, and I'm not sure how good a parallel that is with the OPDC situation, because as Mr. Raphael pointed out, the bus strategy for the OPDC has been prepared by TfL itself. Whereas, so it's not just a case of...
Well, it has been prepared by TfL, but the first page of it says these are a set of ideas, and that there can be no commitment to any of these. They will require, the normal budget testing, the normal process that TfL goes through when it makes a route change or a frequency change, which happen quite a lot in London, but they are about to go into reverse with major cuts in bus routes and frequencies, unless, as I say, Mr. Gove and other parts of government bail out the TfL revenue position. I mean, the Transport Committee of the London Assembly, you can see for yourself, it's been looking at the TfL budget, it's been discussing the TfL budget, the Performance and Budget Committee of the London Assembly, and all is doom and gloom at the moment. It may be within a fortnight, the position changes, and the government does agree. Because the current funding arrangement to TfL is a short-term one, which ends in February. Yeah.
Now there's several points there that you've made, but I want to cover them separately. The first point is, yes, the bus strategy is prefaced by the point that in each element will be evaluated in terms of a business case before it's actually implemented. But I wanted to be clear that for the Kensal Canal side area, there wasn't even a TfL strategy in the first place. It was just the developers wanted some additional buses and they couldn't get TfL to agree to it. Whereas I understand in the OPDC thing, it is TfL itself that has said this level of bus services is needed. It's not just the developers saying we want some buses.
I don't think the developers in the OPDC area, such as City and Docklands and others, and Pocket Living, those putting up those developments, they're in no different position than Sainsbury's, Ballymore and St William. I don't think the OPDC is in a position to command TfL to deliver on bus route and frequency commitments, simply because they have done a very qualified study. They're in the same position as any other London LPA, as I see it. They are part of the federal family. They may get slightly special treatment, but I think unless you can get guarantees and commitments from OPDC that confirms that that bus strategy is realistic and that you can have confidence in all the assumptions built into it, I'm not sure it's worth anything more than a commercial consultant's transport strategy, such as we have seen many. When it comes to the first part of what was said by Mr. Raphael, I mean, we have had a succession of major developments in this part of London. Each time, very professional, highly paid traffic consultants say the impact on these north-south routes will be marginal. They said that in relation to the Westfield Shopping Centre. You're never going to persuade any resident in this area that you can add yet further additional further additional activity in this area, even car-free housing, and increased frequencies of buses on routes that are already congested. I mean, we see every day the traffic that backs up to get onto Wood Lane from North Kensington takes 20 minutes every afternoon. And we've been asking for adjustments to the lights and so forth for 20 years. We assume they are optimized as far as they possibly can be.
Okay, thank you for that.
We don't accept those assurances, I'm afraid. We've seen it before, too many times.
Right. Okay. Well, those are points I'll ask the OPDC to comment on in a minute. But before they do, let's hear from Robin, Robin Brown, who's been patiently waiting. Robin.
Right. Thank you very much. I'm sorry to give Fred a hard time, but Inspector, your point about the capacity of the principal bus routes to accommodate the increased bus flows started me off on a trail searching for documents assessing the performance of the highway network, up-to-date documents, but I failed to find an update on the 2018 Old Oak Transport Strategy, and that is of pre-interim findings vintage. And since then, the whole geography, the whole spatial organizing or distribution of developments has radically changed. So that leads me to express concerns that the modifications are unsupported by appropriate transport and traffic assessments. I've realized the quanta of development remains basically the same, but the distribution of sites and therefore movement demand has shifted geographically. Turning now to Park Royal, at the present moment, entry and exit to Park Royal and navigation through Park Royal is problematical, particularly at peak periods. And I looked for the Park Royal Transport Strategy, and that seems to date from 2016. Paragraph 4.34, page 38, in its conclusions, forecasts traffic flow increase in the final scheme of 2041 of up to 75% on some key internal roads to Park Royal. So we've got not only present day congestion, but up to 75% increase flows on those busy roads. And that potentially significantly increases congestion and journey times and inhibits the free and predictable flow of buses. So I wanted to make that point about or to question whether or not the modifications are supported by appropriate up-to-date transport assessments, which would allow us to give a conclusion on the performance of the highway network and the ability to accommodate the additional bus services efficiently. And then Henry has picked up the point about the current financial predicament of Transport for London, and I've included in the examination library, thanks to Charlotte's assistance, the mayoral press release from December, and that can be read at your leisure. But that mayoral press release raises the spectre of a prolonged period of managed decline by Transport for London and lacking monies to promote new transport improvements and services, and even contemplating service reduction, as Henry has pointed out. So I just wonder also, will there be Grampian conditions attached to any planning permissions for these individual developments that will be coming forward with individual transport assessments, as at the Old Kent Road, where a number of developments in that opportunity are predicated upon the extension to the Bakerloo line, and planning permissions granted to date require the delivery or the planning permissions to date don't allow commencement or going beyond a certain threshold until local transport improvements have been provided. And won't this necessarily have knock-on effects for the delivery timetable? and conformity with the London Plan and compliance with national policy on housing delivery. Thank you. I think that's enough.
Yeah, thank you, Robin. On the very last point, I think the OPDC has made it clear in the papers that they prepared for this hearing that they do expect development to precede the provision of infrastructure, and I've got that clear in my mind that that's their expectation, that they expect the development to occur, and then things like the Old Oak Station and to come along later. And I can see why they're saying that in relation to the rail network, but it's a point that I will put to them in relation to the bus strategy. Okay, so things for the OPDC to respond to then. What I'd like is comment on the degree of commitment that the corporation may have managed to extract from TfL and how that compares with Mr. Peterson's experience in Kensal Canal side. And then I'd like you to comment on Robin Brown's point that the transport studies that Frederick Raphael referred to were, although Mr. Raphael made the point that they modelled scenarios which included high public transport use and the same quantity of development as currently proposed, it was on a different spatial strategy. So that's the second point that I'd like to comment on. And I'd like a brief comment on the degree to which you think we should take account of the current financial difficulties caused by the COVID pandemic in planning for a long-term future. I've got some points that I would like that I will make myself to Henry and to Robin in relation to that, but I'd like to hear from the OPDC first. Mr. Moores, who are you going to ask to comment on that? Will that be Mr. Raphael or Mr. Cardis?
I think Mr. Raphael initially, and then I'll ask Mr. Cardis if he wants to add anything.
Okay, so Mr. Raphael, let's hear from you first on those 3 points that I'd like you to comment on.
Yes, on the bus strategy, the bus strategy actually sort of looks at the changes that are needed to support the development, but each development will be required to submit a transport assessment, which then sort of assesses the impact of the development on buses. And that then provides a basis for negotiating transport contributions to address the impacts of the development to cater for demand on the bus network. This is a sort of usual process. This is the usual sort of negotiation for developments across London. And normally what tends to happen is that TfL will negotiate contributions from developers through the Section 106 process. And that would actually be secured and actually would fund improvements even before development has been actually occupied. That's a usual process. So there's certainty in terms of each development sort of paying a contribution towards improving the bus network. That's as much as I can say on this. TfL is actually confident in the strategy that they put forward. And there is great confidence that actually each development which actually comes online, there would be the analysis of impacts and negotiation and securing contributions through the Section 106 process. The other point was on the strategic transport model and whether that needed to be updated. There's been engagement with TfL throughout the process, throughout the discussions recently with TfL about whether or not the model that has been undertaken in 2018 is appropriate. And I think you made the point that the development capacity has not changed. So what's modeled in 2018 and the sort of future demand on the network is expected to remain very much the same as it has been sort of modeled in 2018. I should also make the point that I believe that the gentleman sort of, asked the question as to whether there would be sufficient capacity, because it was suggested that the demand would increase to 75%. But demand would increase to 75% if there isn't any intervention, and so the interventions are reduced car parking under each development and increase sort of bus journeys and rail services as well. So the strategic transport study actually identifies the interventions that will need to be made, and these are also carried forward into the infrastructure delivery plan, which has a long list of interventions that needs to be sort of made to address the potential impacts on the networks. So there is confidence that the modeling actually shows that with increased dependence on public transport, the road network will perform adequately with the development. I think the second point, sorry, can you remind me? Sorry, the third point.
Third point.
Right, on TfL funding.
Yeah.
On TfL funding, the TfL is continuing its business as usual with, there's a business plan which actually, continues sort of with the, with the current situation, which is the government has actually sort of provided additional funding till February 4th. TfL is still in negotiations with the development. The scenario that the gentleman refers to is the managed decline scenario, which is what if TfL doesn't secure, additional government subsidy? That's hypothetical, and so it is not reflected in TfL's business plan currently. It's probably a worst case scenario. It's what if this funding isn't secured? What happens to the transport network in London, and also what the implications are for the economy of London? So that's very hypothetical, and it's not reflected in TfL's business plan or bus strategy.
Thank you for that, Mr. Raphael. Yes. Can I just ask you to respond on one further point, which is this? Mr. Peterson just made the inference in what he said that the bus strategy that underpins the modifications to the plan is done by TfL as a piece of consultancy work. To what extent do you think that is likely to be honoured by TfL operationally when it comes to the negotiations on improved services needed by each development in turn? In other words, Mr. Peterson has implied that there is a separation, if you like, between what TfL will say as a consultant and what TfL will say as an operator when it comes to the crunch. What do you say to that?
TfL has actually consulted on all development proposals, and the internal process at TfL is that all TfL businesses will be consulted on developments and will be part of the sort of the decisions and negotiation on what the mitigation would need to be for each development. So it is unlikely that actually that TfL buses or the TfL as an operator would not be involved in discussions on major development proposals, and that's standard across London.
Okay. So I'll invite Mr. Peterson and Mr. Brown to come back on any point if you want to. Oh, sorry. I see Tom's got his hand up. I did say I'd listen to Tom first. So Tom Cardiff.
So just to follow up on a couple of points. I mean, in terms of I suppose the kind of point around the difference between Kensington Canal side and how things are done there and how things have been done here and level of commitment. I mean, the team at TfL that produced the bus strategy are exactly the same team that you go to when you've got a planning application, you're negotiating bus contributions. They are the team responsible for the bus network. So To answer your point earlier, I'm confident that when we did come to having a scheme and trying to negotiate something that's in the bus strategy from TfL buses, they would honour that commitment, subject to us having the funding in place. On the 106 funding point, yeah, the approach we've assumed in the local plan to using 106 funding for bus routes is common practice. It's effectively funding for the first kind of 5 years of the bus route. Yes, there is an expectation that it's run on a commercial basis, but the modelling work, even post-COVID, is showing that there is actually expected to be a bounce back in terms of bus usage in outer London, or in outer London is the area of Old Acre Park Royal. Actually, in terms of kind of patronage impacts from COVID, it's central London that's been significantly impacted, most impacted. And actually what you're seeing in sort of mid and outer London is continued need for bus services, and that's expected into the future. So just wanted to make that point. It's pretty worth noting that the kind of wording at the start of the bus strategy is because we're planning for bus routes and bus changes that are going to be happening even 2027 or 2030, and it's not, I suppose, proper for TfL to commit to those services now, because they are sort of recommendations at this point, but they would need to be business case done at the right point in time. And who knows, in 5 years where it might be in terms of bus patronage levels and whatnot. It's right that the current business case work for those routes is done at the point in time they're needed, not at the outset of the local plan sort of production process. And then on the transport modelling discussion we've had. So yeah, it's actually the quantum of development that was assessed in the 2018 model was higher than what's in the local plan because the jobs targets come down. So when it was assessed originally, it was 25,500 homes, 65,000 jobs, whereas now in the local plan, in total development terms, we're 25,500 homes still, but only 56,000 jobs. Also, obviously, in the plan period, the homes and jobs capacities come down. And it's a strategic transport model. It looks at not just the Opdc area and the routes in the Opdc area, but a much wider context. And we did discuss with TfL whether, as Mr. Raphael said, whether the current modelling was sufficient, and it was considered that it certainly was, because quantity development is actually lower. And yes, there are some sort of differences to routes, but for instance, in Old Oak North, the Union Way route was never envisaged as a through route, it was access only, so it doesn't really have a significant impact on kind of congestion in the wider context. So for those, and also, sorry, I was going to mention, we've obviously done a preliminary design and costing study that supports the modifications, and which does look at what access requirements are needed into new sites that we've now allocated, like Channel Gate, North Port Depot. So as a consequence of all of those points, we're confident that modelling that has been done is sufficient for evidence to support the modified draft local plan.
Okay, Emma Williamson next.
Just wanted to make the point that we have already collected £1 million in Section 106 contributions towards bus improvements, and just to clarify that basically that funding would be for the infrastructure as well as pump priming, if you like, the running costs for those buses for the first few years that they're operating. And I think that demonstrates our commitment to collecting those bus contributions and to improving the bus infrastructure within the area. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much for that. Now, there's two other people got their hands up. Let me just see who they are. That's Henry. Henry, before I invite you to comment, let me just tell you what I'm thinking about the current funding difficulties that TfL is in because of COVID. I mean, yes, they are well publicised, and I'm a London resident myself, so I'm aware of them. But the way I look at it is this. This is about a revenue shortfall caused by a reduction in patronage. Okay, so if the reduction in patronage continues, then there will be a continued revenue shortfall. But if the reduction in patronage continues, then there is no justification for the public transport anyway, because the patronage is not there. It kind of balances itself out. If the patronage does return in the way that Tom Cardis says the models expect it to do, then the revenue will also return. And it's then a matter of choice for the mayor as to the degree to which he wants to subsidise public transport in London, and that's a political choice rather than a town planning choice. But the way I look at it is this: the patronage, the demand, and matches the revenue, and if the services are reduced to match the revenue, then they're also matching the demands. It goes hand in hand. I'm not sure that the present difficulties, which are expected to be temporary, are a good sound basis for long-term planning. I think my presumption is, as with what Tom Cardis says, that modelling predicts a bounce back in the long term, and that is probably what I would expect the planning of this area, and indeed of other plans, to be based upon. But you may have a different view, and so let's. You've heard me put the points that you and Robin Brown have made. You've heard me put the points to Mr. Raphael, and you've heard his response and Mr. Cardis' response and Emma Williams' response. So if there's anything you want to come back on, now's your chance.
Yeah, thank you, Inspector. I will try and be very brief. On the last point you made, I mean, I accept that is a view that can be taken. I think our forums are in the position that we see long-term impact of the pandemic as changing fundamentally and forever travel to work patterns and working lives and home life balance in the city, and that has long-term implications for plans, which is one of many reasons why we don't think this is a good moment to be fixing a local plan for the Opdc area, but we'll have to disagree on that. Going back to Mr. Raphael's point, I think we're now all at one that with any development, TfL or others will provide a bus strategy. It then becomes a matter of negotiation as to whether the developer wishes to use 106 resources, which will have other demands on them in order to achieve. And I can't tell you whether what's happening at Kensal is that Sainsbury's, Ballymore and St William are thinking, well, we could spend even more of our scarce 106 resource and have the frequencies that we would ideally like and which are needed to achieve the sort of services that incoming residents will want, but we have too many other demands on land contamination and so forth, so we're not able to do the deal on those. But it's clear that it is a negotiation, and the mere fact that TfL have provided the study does not, as I see it, mean anything in terms of commitment that they will deliver on all of that. And if I'm wrong, it would seem a simple matter for Opdc to provide you with further assurances. And then you also raised the issue, I think quite rightly, that OPD's approach is that you should optimize development around future infrastructure and not worry about the fact that that infrastructure is not there yet. And they used examples of the Northern Line extension at Vauxhall 9 Elms Battersea and around Crossrail 1 stations and going back to Canary Wharf. I mean, we simply don't see those as good examples to follow. Thousands of people have been encouraged and one might say lured into relocating to parts of London in the hope of access to Crossrail several years before Crossrail materialises. Same thing happened with the Northern Line extension to Vauxhall 9 Elms Battersea. That was due to be operational in 2018, and it wasn't. And we know from the history of UK national infrastructure and regional infrastructure projects that there are very few occasions when transport infrastructure has arrived as promised, and that doesn't seem to us a sound and effective way of putting together local plans to just say, fine if it all happens years later than is predicted. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Peterson. Mr. Brown, did you want to come back on anything?
Yes, sir. Right. Yeah. Sorry about that. So my substantive point was about the apparent lack of an up-to-date transport assessment for the modifications.
Yeah.
And I do appreciate that the OPDC has competent planners and other experts at its call. But I did expect that there should be at least an update published to support the modifications, setting out the justifications for their confidence in applying 2016, 2018 assessments to the current spatially different arrangement of development in Old Oakham Park Royal. And so it leads me on to the matter of soundness, which is why we're here today. And we're referring to the 2012 version of the MPPF, and refer to the paragraph 162 on the proportionate evidence base. And that does look for an assessment of the ability of infrastructure to meet forecast demands. And I do hear your point about what to me is the sidestepping by the OPDC on development preceding infrastructure delivery. But there is that paragraph, and the related paragraph 177, which says it's equally important to ensure that there is a reasonable prospect that planned infrastructure is deliverable in a timely fashion. So I don't see the sort of guarantees evident within the plan that even if development is allowed to proceed in advance of infrastructure, that it will be subsequently delivered in a timely fashion later on. And then, of course, there are the highly relevant London plan policies, which you have quoted later on in your agenda paper under point 10, D3 and D2. All right, and I'm sure we'll come to that later. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Tom, you're going to give us some final comments from the OPDC. Before you do, can I say on the relationship between phasing of transport infrastructure delivery and housing and jobs delivery, that there is a difference, isn't there, between the rail improvements, which are we can see that they are under construction. It's going to take a positive decision to abandon them if they're before they are not delivered. So there's a difference between that and bus infrastructure, which is of its nature something that comes and goes. And so it's not unreasonable, is it, for Mr. Peterson and Mr. Brown to be looking for some kind of greater guarantee or assurance from TfL about the provision of bus services as compared with the delivery of the rail infrastructure, which we can see is underway, even if it's not here yet. So anyway, if you can comment on that and round up on any other point that has been made in the discussion. So over to you.
I was actually going to come in respect to the point that Robin made about the lack of kind of documentation clarifying why we considered it appropriate to use this 2018 transport modelling. Just to confirm, we do have a statement of common ground in the examination library with Transport for London, where it's confirmed from Transport for London, who are chief transport modellers for London, that they agree that the modelling that has been undertaken is sufficient. That was the statement of common ground that was signed and accompanies the modified draft local plan in May, that was consulted in May 2021. So we'd be happy to provide a copy of that to you, Inspector. And then just on the point you just made now, I mean, if it helps, we have to get some sort of further submission from Transport for London, just confirming that, it's confirming something online that they, that the assumptions that have been made in the bus strategy update are still fit for purpose, notwithstanding the kind of ongoing sort of business case discussions that are being held with the government and COVID sort of modelling assumptions that are obviously sort of in flux, if that would anyway.
Okay, so that statement of common ground with TfL that you referred to, that's not a document that I've already got. I've got a statement of common ground with well, with the mayor, haven't I? But
it's contained within that. Sorry, I think it's an appendix. I have to go and check. But there was a statement of common ground with the mayor back in March or May 2021, and within that there is a sort of accompanying statement from TfL.
right, okay, and that says that TfL are still happy with the validity of the 2018 modelling. Okay, right, all right, thank you for that. Good. Right, unless anybody else wants to make any comments on my matters of discussion 7, I think I'd quite like to take a break now for about, let's say, 10 minutes and come back at 11:35, and I'll move on then to items 8, 9, and 10 and 11 of my agenda. So go away for a comfort break now, get yourself a cup of tea, and come back at 11:35. Thanks very much. Bye. Right, well, it's 11:35, so let's resume. And I'll start with apologies to Robin Brown, because I see that you've got your hand up, Robin. That was presumably because you wanted to make a comment in relation to the last matter.
Yes, sir. Yeah. It is. I took the opportunity, rather than make a cup of tea, to look at the submission documents, and I did find OPDC document 43 from the GLA with an annex from Transport for London, confirming that they accept to me the ancient transport assessments, but they consider the beneficial to undertake additional work, to commit to undertaking a future refresh of the existing transport strategy. I didn't quite hear, I may have missed it, but an undertaking from the OPDC that they will be undertaking a early refresh of the existing transport strategy.
Okay. Yes, I didn't hear the OPDC give that undertaking, but it is, of course, a national requirement nowadays to review a plan after 5 years in any event. So they don't need to give that undertaking because it's a national requirement. Okay, let's move on, if we may, to my item 8, and this is where I had asked for a series of maps to show almost a time lapse how the various proposed interventions get us from figure 7.10 to figure 7.11 in the modified plan. And we've got from the OPDC this document, which I'm going to share with everyone. You should all see on your screen the document that I've received from the OPDC in response to that. I'm told it's sometimes quite difficult to see these things when they are displayed, so I will enlarge it. There we go. And what it has is successive dates. It's got a series of maps. So this map shows development site and connections for the early years of the plan, and we can see the development phasing shown in two coloured dots, and then the rest of the plan, and similarly the transport enhancement shown likewise. The principal transport enhancement is here at Park Royal down in the bottom left-hand corner, and we can see where the development is happening at Mitre Bridge on Stubbs Lane in early days, and some in North Acton, and development that's next to the canal, near the office where we had earlier hearings. Okay, then there's a map showing the tall buildings for this period. They're the 4 clusters on Scrubs Lane, and then the current bus maps, and then that sequence of 3 maps is repeated for. And then there's the PTAL map, that's the current one there, and then that sequence of maps is repeated for different periods. So this is one for 2027, showing the phasing and the connections then. And the tall buildings, we've got a few more now down Scrubs Lane, and one at Park Royal Central, and the bus service changes, and then the consequent PTAL drawing, and the same for 2032, the development phasing. We're getting more now down the Channel Gate and Acton Wells area, and the adjacent station development kicking in, and the connections there. We're beginning now to get the eastern connection to the Old Oak Common Station, the new roads around Channel Gate, and the connections through North Acton, and the improvements at North Pole. Bus route changes, and then the consequent PTAL change, and then finally we get one for 2038, the development potential, the tall building locations, the bus service changes, and the PTAL map. Okay, so there it is. Let me go back to where I can. Let me unshare that now so I can see you all again. The thing that strikes me about this is that certainly for the early periods of the plan, and indeed for the later periods as well, Scrubs Lane is still pretty poorly scored in terms of PTAL. If we look at the northern bit nearest to Wilson Junction goes up to 4, but the central bit around Mitre Bridge and North Pole remains stubbornly at 3, and that's actually slightly poorer than what is shown in the map in the table of figure modifications to the that were submitted, because figure 711 in that actually shows a few high spots of PTALs 4 along Scrubs Lane, more or less coinciding with the clusters, with the locations of the clusters. But it looks as though on the latest work that Opdc has given me, that that's not generally the case. If one compares the location of the clusters with the incidence of the higher PTALs, one finds that only 2 of the locations of the clusters fall within PTAL 4, and 4 of the locations of clusters fall within PTAL 3, and yet it was one of the justifications for the more intensive development that they would be in locations with PTALs of 4 and above. So that's one point on which I'd like the Opdc to comment. And then the second point is item 9 on my agenda, which is Henry Peterson's comment that the focus of development, now that it has moved from the car giant site to the Channel Gate area, it's actually gone further away from the Old Oak HS2 station, which is the focus of the improved accessibility in the area, and that there's quite a long walking distance or cycling distance, whichever way you look at it, from the Elizabeth Line station or the HS2 station to the major development at Channel Gate, and indeed eastwards onto Scrubs Lane. And so that's a point that's repeated then in item 10. on the agenda. And so I'd like the OPDC to comment on that, which I think you have done in one of your documents. But Henry Peterson has come back with a representation from Google Maps, giving information about the walking distances. And then the third point on which we need to discuss is what I've got is 11 as matter 11 on my agenda, which is that really these development sites, particularly on Scrubs Lane, are justified not so much by high accessibility levels, but really by the requirement to meet a housing target set by the London Plan. That in effect, Henry Peterson seems to be saying that these locations on Scrubs Lane for clusters of high intensity development are suboptimal, but you're being forced into them because of the targets in the London Plan. And yeah, it seems to me that Henry's got a point there. So I would like to hear on that. Now I see Mr. Slaughter's joined us, and you would like to say something, Mr. Slaughter. So let's kick off from hearing from you, and then I'm going to ask the OPDC for some comment. All right. So Mr. Slaughter now.
So thank you very much, and please excuse my slight discourtesy. I have been listening in for most of the morning session, and I'm going to try and listen into as much as possible. But I unfortunately I can't be with you the whole of today and tomorrow morning, and so I'll keep my comment brief. But there are 2 or 3 points I'd like to come up, which I have a particular concern. You realise I'm the Member of Parliament for Hammersmith, and therefore I cover the Old Oak area, or the OPDC that's within London Borough of Hampstead and Fulham. Specifically on this point in relation to transport, you mentioned the Scrubs Lane issue. From my perspective, there's a fundamental change from what was originally proposed to what is proposed in the modification as far as transport is concerned. So you'll be well aware. Previously, I am a supporter of HS2. I'm very pleased to have the Interchange Crossrail. It was originally sold as a package whereby there would be an east and west access, so access from Scrubs Lane as well as from road access, as well as pedestrian and cycle access, as well as from Old Oak Common Lane. We were assured there would be the 2 new overground stations, Hyde Road and Old Oak Common Lane station, and this was a very substantial transport hub. Now, clearly, a lot of that was built around the fact that Old Oak North, the car giant residential development, would have been a new district and would have had a substantial amount of the residential, and of course that before it fell apart, that reached quite an advanced stage of planning. What we have now is dramatically different from that. So, and I agree with what Mr. Peterson has said here about Scrubs Lane. There's no real connection between Scrubs Lane now and the transport hub. There's no additional stations, no access to the HS2 station and Crossrail from that side. And these are mainly individual tall building ribbon developments along that area. Equally, there appears to be little prospect of the Old Oak Common Lane station either, and therefore effectively what we end up with is something very, very different, which is an interchange for HS2 using Crossrail, but also Great Western and other routes to ease the pressure on central London and Euston, without really any expectation that this is going to be an integrated hub. And the fact that Atlas Road and the main residential development, which of course has moved out of my constituency and out of my borough into another borough now, will be at a far distance. It's just a completely different configuration, and it looks as though that what we're being asked to do is to say, well, all the elements are still there. We've still got the housing. It's just in a different place. We've still got the transport interchange. That's just not right. And there are I'll leave my comments there if I may. If I've got time in later sessions to talk about how the new housing configures in relation to tall buildings or concerns about employment, I will do that. But can I just apologise again, sir, for being for cherry picking a little bit your sessions. I mean no disrespect by it.
And none taken. Thank you for sparing this the time at all, Mr. Slaughter. Okay, so Richard Mools, who from the OPDC would you like to comment both on my points that I've raised and on Mr. Slaughter's?
Thank you. If I could ask Peter Farnham to take the lead, and then on the issue 9 point that you raised, Kevin Toney will chip in on that. But if I ask Mr. Farnham to go first, please.
Okay.
Great, thank you, Richard. Thank you all. Good morning, I think it still is, yes. Okay, so picking up some of the questions that you've just posed there, Inspector, I'm going to take you through some information around the use of P-tails and factors in determining connectivity, and then talking about Scrubs Lane in a bit more detail in terms of its current connectivity, future connectivity, as well as the longer term approach to make sure it does continue to be well connected there. So I'll start off with that. If there's any questions throughout, I'm happy to take those and then provide additional responses to those. So to start off with, I'm going to start off with maybe starting a little bit more high level and just kind of reiterating points around London's housing need. So London's housing need is well recognised, and meeting this need is reflected in the OPDC's opportunity area housing targets in the London Plan. London continues to face an acute housing need, which is expected to increase over time, as demonstrated by the following 3 elements. So the first one being the current overall housing targets in the London Plan, which are 52,000 homes per year, falling short of meeting housing need identified in London's 2017 Strategic Housing Market Assessment, which identified 66,000 homes per year. Secondly, the government's new standard method for defining housing need identifies a need for nearly 94,000 homes per year within London. Thirdly, in signing off the London Plan, the Secretary of State confirmed that the London Plan should be reviewed immediately to consider how the higher need for housing can be met and delivered on. Therefore, as the Old Oakham Park Royal Opportunity Area is London's largest opportunity area, it is likely that OPDC can expect to see future increased housing targets to help plug the gap and better meet housing needs. In terms of the point where you mentioned around the development capacities being appropriately justified and not being used just to fulfil or meet the housing targets, within this context of housing growth or housing need, we have established a capacity for growth within the OPDC area by taking account of the indicative capacity for homes and jobs in the London Plan. It's table 2.1, that's set out in policy SD1B5. In establishing the capacity for growth, we have tested these indicative capacity figures to define optimised development capacities for the local plan development sites across the board. The development capacity figures are not driven solely by an attempt to meet the London Plan's 10-year housing target, but do plan to meet OPDC's housing targets in accordance with London Plan Policy D1. The capacity testing is set out in a number of our supporting studies and summarised within the development capacity study alongside some of its own assessments. The supporting studies you'll be familiar with, Inspector, but I'll quickly run through these. They relate to the Future Employment Growth Sector Study, Industrial Land Review and the relevant addendums, the Old Oak North Intensification Study, Channel Gate Development Framework Principles, the Park Royal Development Framework Principles, Scrubs Lane Development Framework Principles, and the Victoria Road and Old Oak Lane Development Framework Principles. And all of these are within the examination library. The DCS update includes the relevant information from these studies and has been developed in accordance with the National Planning Practice Guidance on Housing Economic Land Availability Assessments. Picking up on the points around, we're looking at how to define connectivity. So the previous London Plan did have a lot of focus on the use of P-tails, but it's important to note that P-tails are not and should not be the sole determination of appropriate development capacities. The London Plan 2021 sets out elements to consider in defining capacities, namely within policies D1, D2 and D3. These consider the suitable locations and scale of growth, which is set out in D1, the connectivity and accessibility of sites in D1 as well, the capacity of existing and future planned infrastructure, that's covered off in policies D1 and D2, and then following a design-led approach to make the best use of land to optimise or to establish optimised site capacities, and that's in policies D1 and D3. The development capacity study, its related supporting studies and the infrastructure delivery plan, alongside other relevant supporting studies, provide information to ensure the local plan's development capacities accord with these policies. The identified capacities also reflect London Plan paragraph 2.16, which acknowledges that major transport infrastructure acts as a vital catalyst, unlocking new areas for development, enabling the delivery of additional homes and jobs, facilitating higher densities, using the healthy streets approach to create vibrant neighbourhoods that are appealing places to walk, cycle and spend time, and providing local people with access to the facilities and services they need. And obviously, in relation to the Opdc area, the major transport infrastructure catalyst is the high-speed touring Crossrail station at Old Oak Common. The proposed capacities are in accordance with London Plan Policy D2A1, which makes it clear that it is appropriate to consider the future as well as existing transport connections when determining site capacity. Given the certainty now available on a delivery of the Old Oak Common station, which is under construction, it's not considered appropriate to delay the delivery of sites which are considered available and deliverable in advance of the station opening, and importantly, which can be well served by existing stations, new and improved bus services and walking and cycling infrastructure. In doing so, it is important to ensure that the development capacity for these sites is being optimised, including through the delivery of tall buildings where appropriate, and mindful of new public transport, walking and cycling connections being delivered and planned to be delivered in the Opdc area. It is the express purpose of a local plan to plan for the future of an area and ensure development is appropriately capitalising on future infrastructure. The approach to optimising development and delivering tall buildings ahead of planned infrastructure is considered to be justified and has been common practice in planning authorities across London. Examples include Vauxhall 9 Elms, ahead of delivery of the Northern Line extension, plans from the various local planning authorities along Crossrail, and also we've also mentioned the Old Kent Road awaiting the opening of the Bakerloo Line station. It should also be noted that while there are sensitive locations in and around the Opdc area, which will require sympathetic response in terms of scale of massing and densities and capacities, there are also larger development sites with a context that enables the opportunity for extensive growth. In addition to defining appropriate development capacities, policies in the local plan, London plan, and material and other material considerations will be utilised in the development management process to deliver the local plan spatial vision and create a sustainable, healthy and high quality new part of London and successful industrial area. I'm just going to make a note on, or make a few statements on the methods for considering connectivity objectively. So we're all familiar with PTAL and how that can be used to help inform understanding levels of connectivity. But London Plan Policy D2A2 also makes reference to TfL's time mapping tool, or TIM for short, which helps to define connectivity and accessibility to local services. It's publicly available. It uses the same website as the PTAL, WebCap, I believe it's called. It provides current data and data forecasting to 2031, the same levels of forecasting that PTAL uses online. It shows access to employment, town centres, health services and educational establishments via public transport. TIM shows the travel times in 15-minute increments, with less than 15 minutes being the most well-connected locations. So with this wider, broader context, I'm going to focus on the connectivity points around Channel Gate and Scrubs Lane as well. So we are clear that Channel Gate will be delivering a range of densities, including high density developments, and also densities which reflect the adjacent residential areas, such as the Island Triangle. This reflects the area's connectivity and responds to the surrounding context. And it's reflected in the general building heights guidance we set out in policy P9, or channel gates within the local plan. So officers consider that channel gates will be well connected by walking, cycling routes and public transport, both to the Old Oak Common Station, North Acton and Wilton Junction, and other destinations including Harlesden Town Centre to the north. Connectivity will also be improved through new walking and cycling infrastructure across channel gates, including across the Grand Union Canal as well. And this will also provide ease of access to other locations I've not previously mentioned, including Wormwood Scroffs, North Acton and Park Royal Centre. These improvements to connectivity are reflected in the P-Town modelling for the local plan period. This shows that the majority of channel gate ranges from P-Town 6B to 3, with a small portion of P-Town 2. And in comparing this to other major redevelopment schemes across London, this is comparable to South Quay, which is just south of Canary Wharf, the Greenwich Peninsula and Wembley Park as well. In addition, the TIM modelling for channel gates, and to do this you can easily just drop a pointer within the website for channel gate. It shows that channel gate will be at the most well-connected level, being within 15 minutes via the public services and other services I mentioned previously. What the TIM modelling doesn't reflect is the proposed town centre uses on channel gates as part of the Old Oak major town centre. And this will be obviously delivering town centre uses and social infrastructure. So should TIM modelling identify further more detailed increments, it will be seeing improvements there. So in light of that, we consider that both P-Town and TIM modelling demonstrates that channel gates will be well connected. With regards to Scrubs Lane, we've updated the Scrubs Lane Development Framework Principles context information, looking at how its existing connections demonstrate it's well connected. And this shows that there are a number of destinations in and around the area. So if I go through these, there's Wilton Junction Station, there's White City Station, and we've looked at primary schools and health facilities. We've looked at the current walking times, cycling times and bus times for these. And it shows that Scrubs Lane is well connected to getting to stations, primary schools, secondary schools, health facilities, and open spaces. So I'll pick a few examples, but I'm happy to provide a full table in detail to you, Inspector, if that's useful. So in terms of walking, these are measured from Mary Seacole Gardens, which is at the centre of Scrubs Lane. And it shows that a walking distance is 14 minutes up to Wilton Junction Station, cycling 6 minutes, and bus is a little bit longer at 12 minutes. White City to the south, White City Station, is 23 minutes walking, but as it's downhill, it's 10 minutes cycling, and then 8 minutes by bus. And then if we're looking at Harlesden Town Centre, that's a 15-minute walk away, 7 minutes on the bike, 13 minutes by bus. And then primary schools, they're between 10 and 23 minutes walking. Secondary schools, 12 to 24 minutes walking, and then health facilities, 14 minutes to 21 minutes walking. So that's the current state of play within Scrubs Lane. So we do note that the PTAL levels for Scrubs Lane are relatively low at 1B to 3, but as I've previously stated, PTAL shouldn't be the sole determination of appropriate estimates. The TIM modelling, which you can do yourself, and we're happy to provide this to you as well for Scrubs Lane, shows that Scrubs Lane will be within that 15-minute increment well connected as well, so to provide that.
Okay, sorry to interrupt you, Peter. Yes, I would appreciate a note of the TIM modelling and also those figures you gave for walking and cycling distances to various facilities. That would be, if you could provide me a note of those, that would be useful. Yeah, anyway, I interrupted you. I'm sorry, go on.
No, more than happy to provide that to you, Inspector. So in terms of future connectivity and how that relates to PTALs, it's worth noting, I know that you mentioned the support for higher development capacities and tall buildings with PTALs 4s and above. In the tall building statement, that's not the case for Scrubs Lane. We talk about improvements to PTALs within our evidence base for Scrubs Lane. There are other locations where we talk about PTAL levels 4 and above, but it doesn't apply to Scrubs Lane. That's set out in the tall building statement for that. In terms of the future context for Scrubs Lane being well connected, and this is obviously set out in the PTAL forecast note, but I'll take you through a bit more detail. So connectivity will be improved through new walking and cycling infrastructure, including new and enhanced east-west routes along Scrubs Lane and to Scrubs Lane from surrounding destinations. As previously mentioned, new and enhanced bus routes will also be delivered along Scrubs Lane, connecting to the future Worm Scrub Streets, which will then connect on to Kensal Canal sides and the town centre uses there. So this will ultimately enhance connectivity with the surrounding destinations, including Harsden Town Centre, Kensal Canal side, as I mentioned, White City, Wormwood Scrubs and Old Oak Common Station. So these improvements to connectivity are reflected in the PTAL modelling. It does show that the majority of Scrubs Lane is shown at PTAL 3, where development is identified. But if you go further to the north, it increases to 4 and then 5 as it goes up to Harrow Road there. And as I mentioned, the TIM modelling, if you look at the 2031 modelling, still identifies it will be well connected within 15 minutes. So having gone through Channel Gate and Scrubs Lane, I'm just going to give you a brief overview of some other major development areas in London and how it relates to some sites within the OPDC area. The clearest way to do that is looking at the PTALs and the maximum walking distances to existing and future rail services as well. Generally, we compare favourably to other major regeneration schemes. So if we're looking at North Acton and Acton Wells, which will have the highest residential densities in the OPDC area, distances to stations are comparable to the very high density developments at Woodwolf in the Isle of Dogs, Battersea Nine Elms and Elephant Park, Elephant Castle. The capacities identified for both Channel Gate and Scrubs Lane require generally lower densities than those identified for Acton, and walking distances to these stations again compare favourably to King's Cross, Wembley and the East India Docks as well, near to Canning Town. For the Mitre Way area of Scrubs Lane, further to the south of the Grand Union Canal, distances are comparable to Meridian Water in Enfield, Leven Road Gasworks in Tower Hamlets, and Kensal Canal side, just across the boundary with Kensington and Chelsea. It's important to note that the Mitre Way area, as we mentioned, is directly adjacent to the Kensal Canal side opportunity area, and for this site, 3,500 homes has been identified by RBKC's local plan to be delivered over the next 10 years, and there are currently 2 major planning applications being either shortly being submitted or under consideration at the moment, and there will be that connection of Wormwood Scrub Street connecting the Mitre Way area to Kensal Canal side, as agreed by the Department for Transport in their responses and statements of common ground. In addition to this, there will be significantly improved meeting times provided by Elizabeth Line, which is likely to mean that passengers from the surrounding areas of the OPDC area will be prepared to walk longer distances to Old Oak Common Station to enable them to reach destinations further afield as well. And access to this will be supported by new and improved walking and cycling connections, including the eastern access from Scrubs Lane, and also new access points from the northwest and in the future south as well. So I think that's picked up the majority of the questions which you've asked for. There was the point in terms of walking distances from Channel Gate to the Old Oak Common Station. I might look to my colleague Kev here, who might be able to help whilst I look for some material for this. But essentially, the walking distances from Channel Gate to Old Oak Common do, as I said, do compare favourably to other major regeneration areas within London. Importantly, Old Oak Common won't be the sole station which people from Channel Gate will be using. They will have ease of access to Wilson Junction Station, just to the north, and North Acton to the south as well, prior to the Old Oak Common Station opening as well. We have done some walking distance measurings ourselves from Channel Gate to Old Oak Common Station. We're happy to provide that information to you. Point in terms of Mr. Peterson's direction and location of the walking route, it doesn't fully follow the scheme proposed by High Speed 2, i.e. the entrance a little bit further to the south, so you do end up with a longer route. So we'll be happy to provide a map showing the route according to the proposed scheme by High Speed 2 and the how long that route is in terms of meters for and cycling. But regardless, to get to the Old Oak Common Station from Channel Gate, you will have in the shorter term, and it will be slightly longer, and in the longer term, we'll be able to go through a link via the Old Oak Common main station as well. Kev, was there anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, so I think I can pick up, basically some of the queries that were set out in your issue 9, Inspector, to provide some clarification on the walking distances that were mentioned there. Things want to note that while we can't really speak to the detail of how other parties may have measured walking distances, it should be noted that sites referenced do form large redevelopment areas where some parts will be quite a bit closer to nearby stations than other parts. But to provide some clarity on this, we have undertaken an assessment on walking distances from these key development areas to the nearby stations based on the future movement network that's set out in the draft plan. With respect to Channel Gate, when fully developed, this shows that all homes planned within Channel Gate will be within between 200 metres to 700 metres of either Wilson Junction Station and or the new Old Oak Common Lane Overground Station. In addition to this, all homes will be within between 600 metres to kilometres of Old Oak Common Station. Potential early delivery sites within Channel Gate, anticipated to be delivered in the first 10 years of the planned period, will all be within 750 metres of either Wilson Junction Station or North Acton Station, in addition to being served by existing and improved bus services at Old Oak Lane and Victoria Road, and by other enhanced walking and cycling connections. With respect to North Acton and Acton Wells, this area will be very well connected to rail services, with all homes within 550 metres of North Acton Station and Old Oak Common Lane Overground Station. In addition to this, all homes will be within 900 metres of Queen Elizabeth Line services at either Old Oak Common Station or Acton Mainline Station. Pete has spoken to Scrubs Lane, but just to give some clarity on that again, it's all development in Scrubs Lane north of the Grand Union Canal will be within 900 metres walking distance of either Wilson Junction Station and or Old Oak Common Station. In advance of Old Oak Common Station, homes within the Mitre Wharf cluster to the south of that area will be within 1.1 kilometres from Wilson Junction Station. South of the Grand Union Canal, the area that we refer to as Mitre Way, homes in this area will be within 850 metres to 1.25 kilometres of Old Oak Common Station. Mitre Way will also be served by new bus routes, which will route through the area and the adjacent Kensal Canal side opportunity area. As Peter said, I think officers consider these walking distances do help demonstrate that these areas will be well connected, especially when they are compared with similar regeneration areas and large development schemes across London that are being delivered at similar densities. And also to enforce Pete's point, we'll be happy to share the detail of the figures that we've just quoted here and the maps demonstrating how these have been measured with the inspector following the hearing sessions. Just the other point we wanted to touch on was the 960 metre outer limit for PTEL assessments that was referenced. So just to note that this 960 metres is the maximum walking distance to the nearest transport node that's recognised in the software calculating the PTEL's ITFL. This includes walking distances to bus stops as well as walking distances to station entrances. So as such, it is incorrect to state that an area which is greater than 960 metre walking distance from a station is beyond the outer limit of a PTEL assessment. as is demonstrated in the future PTAL mapping that we've prepared. No area is planned for housing in the Opdc area with a PTAL of 0, and all new homes will be within at most 400 metres of a bus service, while the vast majority is likely to be within circa 200 metres or so of a bus service. So thank you there, Pete. Thanks.
Okay, thanks for that. Right. Yeah, I'll throw this open now to discussion from everybody else. Henry Peterson, you've got your hand up first, so you can go first.
Thank you, Inspector. Obviously quite a lot there to respond to. I will be as quick as I can. A couple of quick ones. On my map of walking distance from Old Oak Common Station to Channelgate, I mean, that is a Google Earth straight line measure from the middle of the Channelgate site, i.e. some people will be nearer, some people will be further, to what I thought were the station platforms for the new station. It may be a little longer from the sound of it, but I mean, there is that long forecourt to walk through. It is then a very dreary walk up Old Oak Common Lane to get to Atlas Wharf. And it's not a route that can be activated realistically. You walk past the new Oakland's Rise development, but that's about the biggest excitement you'll find on the way. I'll come back to Scrubs Lane in a minute, because as Andrew Slaughter said, that is one of the biggest concerns of local people, that high density housing will leave people marooned in an area which is not well connected and will not be well connected for a very long time to come, if ever. Just a point on London Plan D3, optimising site densities. In OPDC-44, which is a statement of conformity with the London Plan, for whatever reason, I cannot see that D3 is mentioned. And that's a puzzling gap, because it's a very major London Plan policy when you're looking at allocating sites for high density housing in a local plan. And that purports to be a statement of conformity that goes through all the relevant London Plan policies. We'll come back to that this afternoon on D9 and tall buildings. On TIM mapping, just so that we're all clear, the 15 minutes referred to is 15 minutes by public transport or other means. It's not a walking distance. This is not the 15-minute neighbourhood concept that has received a good deal of attention in London during a COVID era. It's not 15-minute walking distance, it's 15 minutes through other means of transport, getting on a bus or an underground or whatever. Now, I mean, that is not great for anybody living in what is normally viewed as near central London. When it comes to PTAL generally, I won't go through the detail of this, but I mean, in our last submission to you, we have urged you to look at the PTAL maps generated by the WebCat model. Same overall TfL model, but this version is available to developers, it's available to residents, it's available to anybody. It's pretty simple to use and to navigate. And we have produced maps of the 2031 position as forecast, and they do not match those produced by OPDC. So I think you need to be very clear and have it explained what assumptions are built into those new 4 PTAL maps from OPDC. If they are to be relied on, there needs to be more clarity on the proportion of the improved PTAL which results from the main OOC station, and ideally split that between Crossrail and HS2 passenger numbers, i.e. what assumptions are being made about improvements in local connectivity from the main station. We don't think in practice it'll be very much. Then the proportion which rests on Old Oak Common Lane overground, which all our evidence is that is not funded, unlikely to be funded. I've talked before about TfL's budget crisis, won't go through that again. When is it being assumed to become operational? It was originally costed at 198 million in the original TfL consultation and due to open in 2025. But we don't think that's ever going to happen, and that obviously has a big impact on the assumptions and detail levels built into the models that you've been shown in the 4 versions. And then thirdly, the proportion of those improvements which result from those proposed but uncertain bus routes that we talked about at some length previously. So our view is, unless until you get that level of detail, it would be unwise to rely on those 4 new maps. They've obviously been prepared by TfL at the request of Opdc. I don't know whether TfL provide a similar service to any London planning authority where you give them a list of assumptions and propositions and then they go away and come up with a new map for you. They may do that, but what is critical is what is fed into that. And as everybody knows, what you feed in results in what comes out at the other end. I don't think we've ever suggested that 960 meters is the sole measure in PTEL. As you can see from the maps, the middle of Wormwood Scrubs has a PTEL level of 0. Little bits of Channelgate has a PTEL level of 0, because you're not near a bus tube or anything. So our main point is to urge you to look very carefully at those 4 sets of assumptions, because until you know exactly what assumptions have been used, I don't think they tell you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Okay. Let's see. I don't see anyone else who wants to comment at this stage. But I'll ask Peter to. Oh yeah, Robin Brown, you do. You've got your hand up there. So Robin Brown, let's hear from you.
So thank you. I don't necessarily want to stray from the matters at hand, and I defer to Henry on his local knowledge on walking routes and to the analysis of PTEL maps. I did want to point out that since Old Oak Commons Lane station has been mentioned, that there is another hurdle apart from the current predicament of Transport for London's funding situation, that recently the Department for Transport cancelled a proposed station at Beam Park in Dagenham as representing poor value for money, despite its immediate unlocking of some 3,000 homes in a PTEL 0 site, and later on potentially unlocking up to 7,000 homes. Now, I would just draw your attention to this as being another hurdle that Old Oak Common Lane Station has to jump, and that it isn't necessarily a realistic proposition for the foreseeable future. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Robin. Mr. Peterson, you got your hand up again? Did you want to say something? You're muted, Mr. Peterson. You're muted.
Very quickly, on Wormwood Scrub Streets, with Peter Farnham referred to as much improving the connectivity of Mitre Bridge, Mitre Way, whatever. And it would be, may ultimately be, a very important east-west route running right across. But we do not see that happening anytime soon. I've referred to the Kensal Canal Side Opportunity Area. The strip of land below the railways there is the route through which that street would go. The developers at Kensal Canal Side are occupying the area north of the rail lines, and they acknowledge there will be no vehicular route through to Scrubs Lane for the foreseeable future. There will be the canal side towpath, fine for pedestrians and cycles, although extremely busy and congested already, but there will be no vehicle route. You've got the West London Line embankment in the way. It would need to be tunnelled through. There are propositions for that in the Opdc infrastructure delivery plan, but they are year 20 plus. But a lot of People have thought Wormwood Scrub Street is imminent, caused a lot of anxiety for the friends of Wormwood Scrubs and others, but it is a distant project and unfunded.
Okay, thank you, Henry. Right. Okay, so I think if the OPDC to respond, and in doing so, two points in particular, which I've noted here. Yeah, the detail maps that you included within the document OPDC 45 that's now on the website, the phasing and tall building information note of 29th of December 2021, that's got PTAL maps which are different from those in the modifications themselves. Is it the case that we should substitute those PTAL maps for the figure 711 in the modifications? That's one thing I'd like you to comment on. And then the other thing I'd like you to comment on is I think I know the answer, but back in earlier stages of the examination, there was reference to a campaign by Royal Borough Kensington and Chelsea to get an Elizabeth Line station at North Kensington, and it might be helpful to know what the present status of that campaign is, if it's been abandoned or whether they're still pursuing it. Henry, you've got a hand up again. Did you want to comment on that particular point?
I'm very, very happy to comment on that, because obviously it's been a big issue in the Kensal Canal side supplementary planning document, which Kensington Chelsea has produced, which is on their website, and in the development applications that are coming forward. You're quite right. For many years, assumptions have been made that there could be a Crossrail station at Portobello North, as it was called, on that site. The council now acknowledges that's not going to happen. Crossrail do not see that as a viable and economic proposition. The SPD acknowledges that. It doesn't feature in the developers' proposals for those two sites. That would have had an impact on connectivity of the Mitre Bridge, Mitre Yard, North Pole Depot, Tall Towers, but it's not going to happen.
Okay, thanks for that. Right, let's hear from presumably Peter Farnham in the first instance to comment on anything you've heard.
Will do. Thanks, Inspector. Thanks, Henry, for your points. Inspector, I'll start off with responding to your first two. In terms of the PTAL maps in the forecast note we submitted in December, these should substitute what was in the previous document for the proposed figure modifications. They're based on more detailed analysis of the movement area undertaken by TfL. In fact, the lead PTAL officer at TfL undertook them for us. With regards to the current status of the Elizabeth Line station at Kensal Canal side, so the RBKC are still promoting it. However, the applications submitted are on the basis that there is no station being brought forward there. However, in the policy material, they are the council still supportive of the station. Moving on to some of Henry's points in relation to the the connection between Common Station and Channel Gate. We don't necessarily agree with Henry's view that it will be a dreary walk. I think we can safely say that the park being proposed by High Speed 2 will be of excellent quality, with a number of activation elements, also including the adjacent station Benevent site to the south, which will have commercial uses fronting onto the public realm there. Further to the north, you have some Old Oak Common Lane sites, which are development sites in the development capacity study. So they will be providing active frontages along Old Oak Common Lane, as does the current Oakland site have some active frontages where it meets Old Oak Common Lane as well. So you have a nice kind of active route enabling people to get to between the two destinations easily and pleasantly as well. In terms of Henry's reference to the Statement of Conformity with regards to policy D3, the intention of this document wasn't a blow-by-blow account of every policy within the London Plan and how the local plan demonstrates its in general conformity. It was in response to, I believe, Inspector, queries from yourself, which we provided. However, obviously, we do consider that we are in general conformity with policy D3 in the London Plan. In terms of PTALs, so the difference between the WebCat 2031 forecast and our forecast in the PTAL forecast in the forecast note is that we have undertaken a lot more detailed analysis of the proposals than that is within the WebCat 2031 analysis. The obvious one there is that the Old Oak Common Station does not show up on the 2031 WebCat, so we would urge you to utilise the maps we have provided in the forecast note. We do set out in broad terms what the PTAL forecasts are based on, and we're happy to provide more information if that would be useful to you on that as well. In terms of both Henry's and Robin's points in relation to the Old Oak Common Lane station, so for this, mainly in regards to Robin's points, it does have a very strong business case. I think it's 3.1 to 1, and that's largely in its ability for the interchange with the Old Oak Common Station. So it's not truly comparable with Beam Station, which Robin made reference to there as well. Oh, sorry, Robin, did you want to come in?
Sorry. Yes. No.
Robin.
No, no intervention. Sorry, I beg your pardon.
No.
That's right. We heard a noise from an unidentified source. Obviously, wasn't you. Fair enough. Go on, Peter. Carry on.
Okay. I mean, just to clarify that Old Oak Common Lane Station, it isn't required to support the demand capacities proposed in the local plan, and is identified for after the plan period. I think with regards to Wormwood Scrub Street, so I mean, Opdc and RBKC officers, we work very closely in the development of the proposed modifications of the local plan and in the development of RBKC's Kensal Canalside supplementary planning document. This demonstrates that the delivery and phasing of what we call Wormwood Scrub Street,